What the staff has done is discuss the possibility of looking at what's called a hotel occupancy tax for venue projects.
This past Tuesday, city staff went before the Wichita Falls City Council presenting plans to up the hotel-motel tax. They're proposing an increase to a visitor's stay, and if approved by councilors, the citizens of Wichita Falls would then have the final say through a November election. And here to explain more on this is Wichita Falls Deputy City Manager Jim Dockery and Convention and Visitors Bureau Director Lindsay Barker. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
You.
Jim, let me start with you. Talk a little bit about the idea of possibly raising the hotel-motel tax in order to do improvements to the MPEC and Memorial Auditorium.
Okay, well, what's being proposed and what's being recommended by the city staff for the city council to consider is putting this proposition on the ballot in November for the citizens to consider increasing the hot tax or the hotel occupancy tax for specific venues. We have 4 facilities that are used primarily for entertainment, tourism type activities, those being the Memorial Performance Hall, the 3 facilities at the Multipurpose Events Center, the Ag Center, the Exhibit Hall, and the Coliseum. Those facilities are starting to show some fairly significant signs of wear and tear, and we don't have a funding source in place today to take care of those fairly sizable capital improvements. So what this tax would do is increase by an additional 2% what a hotel visitor pays when they come to Wichita Falls. And we would utilize that tax then to pay for the annual debt service obligations for these improvements that we need to make.
Now, since we've done stories on this, some of our viewers have reached out to us and asked, well, what's the city doing already with the 6% tax?
Well, we have a 7% tax. The state gets 6% of it, so the total occupancy tax for a hotel stay now is at 13%. With the 7%, we've been utilizing it historically for the operations of the facilities and to pay Lindsay's staff to bring visitors to the community through the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And then a small portion goes towards the local arts agencies in the communities like the ballet and symphony and the Backdoor Theater and other event venues that bring in tourism as well. So those funds that we're generating today are consumed by operations. We don't have a funding source set aside for capital repairs. So that is what the intent of this additional 2% is intended for, is to keep those facilities in a state of repair that we can be proud of.
And Lindsay, not too long ago at City Council, you summarized what numbers were looking like last year. What are numbers looking like for people coming to Wichita Falls and staying at hotels now?
Well, so great question. Every year the state will release a report of our visitor spending and our visitor numbers. And we don't have the visitor numbers for 2018 yet, but in 2017 we had over 2.5 million visitors here in the Wichita Falls metro area. And then our visitor spending in 2018 in Wichita County, it actually increased by 14 million, and that total number was $239 million. So it's a huge amount of visitor spending. We have people here, they are traveling here. We're a good location. Sometimes if people are stopping through, we get a lot of business travelers. We have a lot of travelers from Shepherd Air Force Base and from our conventions. And so it's exciting to see that positive trend of our visitor spending continue to increase.
And not so positive, and I hate to keep coming back to it, but as we know what happened back in May with the bond election, what are you doing this time differently to get the message out that this is something that's really needed?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that is to our benefit is that we have a little bit more time. You know, last time, unfortunately, just with the timing of the way things worked out, it was a little bit crunched, and we at city staff have, you know, there comes a point where we're not able to actually speak on the subject. We just can only provide factual information. But this time around, we've got a little bit more time, so that's really our intent here. We want to get out and educate, try to get that information out to our local citizens to let them know that if this passes, or if the council wants to move forward with it, it's not going to affect them. They do not pay this tax unless they're staying in one of our hotels.
Speaking of affecting, I want to ask you, Jim, we know about possible bond election happening with the school district, completely 2 different issues with this tax and them. Are you concerned that may have a negative impact at all on the election?
Well, we visited with, the city manager did visit with the superintendent of schools just to make sure that they were aware of what we were planning to do as a form of courtesy to make sure, because I know that they are contemplating putting a major bond proposition on in November as well, so we may have voters going out for both of these issues. We see this as a positive for the bond issue, and hopefully a good turnout will be positive for this particular issue as well. And the reason I say that is the hot tax, as Lindsay mentioned, is a way to provide funds without really putting the burden at all on our local taxpayers. That's what was, I think, the negative connotation that we took away from the previous bond issue when some of these propositions were on that ballot. So if we can just get that message out that this isn't going to impact the local taxpayer, and these are facilities that our local taxpayers use along with visitors, it should be a win-win situation. And that, from the school district's perspective, is a positive for their campaign. So we hope to just get that message out, make that message clear, and then everything should be hopefully a positive situation for us.
And finally, I want to invite you to address the people who say, I don't stay at hotels, nobody I know comes into the city, stays at hotels, this has nothing to do with me, I'm either not going to vote or vote against it. What would you say?
Well, I think we need to get out and vote for it because, yes, they may not stay in hotels, so it's not going to impact them. But if this doesn't pass, then it could come back to be a situation where we have to rely on incremental tax adjustments to our local citizenry to pay for these facility improvements, because they have to be done at some point. As everyone knows, facilities age, and they get to a point where they're out of style, they're out of date, and they also need major capital repairs and replacements of infrastructure. And this will give us a source from now on, assuming that we can continue to keep this 2% in existence, to keep these facilities in a state of repair without relying on our local taxpayers. So we would encourage everybody to come out. If they don't stay in hotels, they do use, I'm sure, the facilities that we provide by going to concerts, by going to soccer games, by attending local luncheons and going to home and garden shows. All of those facilities are utilized by our citizenry, and this is a way to keep those facilities up without burdening them.
And Lindsay, if people want to find out more information, where can they go?
They can just go to the city's website or to our CVB website, which is wichitafalls.org.
And you want to add something?
Yeah, I do. I would also say tourism, you know, even for those who maybe don't stay in our hotels, tourism has an impact on our local economy. So for us as a CVB, we need to be able to sell those facilities to attract our conventions to Wichita Falls, which means that we need to maintain them. We need to have them updated to compete with our peer cities. And so when we're able to bring those conventions in, those are people who are bringing in outside dollars and they're spending money here locally. So they're shopping in our shops, they're eating in our restaurants, they're buying gas. So that in turn has a direct impact for our citizens. So even though they may not stay in a hotel, you know, they may not think that it pertains to them in the long run, in the big picture, it really does. And this is also something that's very common practice in a lot of our cities. When you look at our market comparison, we have in that spreadsheet, there are 14 of our peer cities, and then we also added Lubbock because we compete against Lubbock as well. And out of those 14 original peer cities, 7 of them were already at a rate higher than Wichita Falls. So it's very common practice. A lot of cities do this, and we're competing against those cities, you know, that have those types of facilities that they're able to maintain. And so I think it's a win-win.
And you all have it spelled out in the flyers, which, by the way, lists that this is supposed to bring in an estimated $550,000 annually to take care of some of the debt service, correct?
That's our estimate today based on what we're bringing in. That would continue to rise, assuming that we can continue to see increased tourism dollars. People staying in our hotels, but right now we're estimating $550,000, and that will finance or pay the annual debt service obligation on a 20-year debt for a package of about $6 to $7 million. So that $6 to $7 million of improvements to those facilities would have to come elsewhere if we didn't go this route.
And last question, completely separate issue, want to make it clear. Can you give us an update on the other piece of the hotel aspect of the city's looking at?
Yes, sir. We are still continuing to work with a developer, a different developer than what we originally started out with, for them to make a major investment in our community, upwards of about $30 million for a full-service hotel, where the city would be a partner in financing, not in operating or managing, but basically providing some financial incentives for them to consider making that investment in Wichita Falls. They're looking at 150 to 200 rooms, which is much smaller than the two facilities that we had back in the 80s and 90s that were full-service hotels. We need that full-service hotel to help with Lindsay's efforts bringing these additional conventions in. We feel the hotel industry will all benefit because the types of hotel or types of events that she's talking about bringing here will need upwards of 600-700 rooms. And so this facility is just mainly a headquarters hotel. We hope to be getting some arrangements or agreements with the developer fairly soon and seeing their initial conceptual plans for the hotel. Assuming that we can get those agreements in place, this particular firm has no problems getting the financing for their share of the facilities. So we think once we can get the preliminary designs agreed to and the agreement language that everyone needs to run through attorneys and so forth. Once we get those two things ironed out, we should be off and running on designing the facility, getting the financing for the facility, and then hopefully about 2 years later have it opening. And that will be a big boost to our impact facilities. So we want to keep those facilities in good shape as well for that particular opportunity because these conventions are utilizing these impact facilities, and we don't want them to be standing in a room with a leaking roof.
Well, as they say, only time will tell.
All right, time will tell.
Jim, Lindsay, thank you very much. And of course, we'll have all the information on this over on our website, Texomashomepage.com.